All right, everybody, welcome to Empire Nation. My name is Dave, and I'm joined in this by Kartik Krishnaiyer. Both Kartik and I are going to be doing these videos slash podcast weekly to just talk about how the American imperialism, I guess we can say it is now. That's where we've gotten to nowadays. To talk about how it affects other countries, both internally and then obviously within the whole sphere of international relations. So, Kartik, thank you very much for joining me or joining us. This is our joint program together. So, he and I will always be doing this together. Yeah, so before we get into it, Kartik and I talked about doing this because of it wasn't just because of Venezuela, but he and I had always talked about how the what's going on here in the United States as far as international affairs, how that affects things domestically, not just from a historical standpoint, but also current events. And we finally decided, well, this is a podcast that we need to do. So he and I talked about it, and here we are. So Kartik, welcome. Like, what have you thought about before we get into our topics for today? Let's just talk about the last few months. Like, what's been your thoughts of this?
Yeah, it's been pretty horrifying. So one of the things I would be very clear in pointing out is that I think part of this series was inspired by my interactions with Canadians and talks about Canada, and and I just wrote a book about Canada and the U.S. and that relationship, historic relationship, and it seems like anytime you have a conversation with Canadians now, at this point, the last 6 months, not not 3 years ago, although this has always been under the surface in Canada, just underneath the surface. I think we can all acknowledge there is this. The overarching theme isn't just Donald Trump, but it's American imperialism and it's Yankee diplomacy, which is the U.S. Being very aggressive in using its strengths relative to Canada to try and bully Canada into submission. So this has become the theme of a lot of the conversations both you and I have been having the last 6 months to the last year. I guess it's now January of 2026. So this started exactly a year ago when Donald Trump started talking about 51st state and annexing Greenland and taking back the Panama Canal and all of that nonsense. And I mean, the Panama Canal thing in particular, I laughed at because there's no way. Well, the Canada thing too. But now, who knows? All bets
But here
are
we
off.
are.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah, and Kartik, that was good that you mentioned a thing about Canadians, right? Because I always say I went to school at McGill University, and so I lived in Canada for 2 years. And Canadians, they never want to be confused with Americans, and I totally understand why. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the topic of today, which the topic of today is obviously Venezuela, obviously the invasion and kidnapping of the leader of a sovereign nation by the United States. I mean, we've done this before. We did this with Noriega in Panama. Now, not to the flagrant extent as we're doing it now, but it is a pure violation of sovereignty nonetheless. Whether you like Maduro or not, that's not really the issue. I think the Republicans and everyone on the right are trying to make Maduro the issue, whereas the people on the left, they're trying to make it an international law or a really constitutional law here in the United States issue as well. Because a lot of people do talk about quote unquote international law. I hate to say it, international law is not enforceable, really, unless the country that you're in decides to enforce it.
This is what we've learned with the boat strikes in the Caribbean. Just to go back, I mean, Rory Stewart, who I think you and I both are big fans of, former Tory MP and minister, who's what we would call a wet Tory, right? Not, very, very down the middle. He was saying right away in September, this is a violation of international law. He was incredibly alarmed by the boat strikes. You weren't hearing all of this in the U.S. media, but there's no enforcement mechanism. And
Right.
we've learned that throughout history, and this is another example of it.
Yeah, and I mean, so let's go ahead. Actually, that's the best country to start getting into because everybody knows what happened. We're not going to get into what happened with Venezuela. The media is all over that, but we do want to talk about what's happening internally within other countries, particularly when it comes to political divisions. Because I think what's happening there is we're starting to see some real rifts and maybe some unholy alliances as well that might be emerging out of Europe. And of course, today we also had the European countries, or a number of European countries, not all that I know of. I saw, 7 or 8 or so in this memorandum to protect Greenland. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's go ahead and talk about Venezuela in regards to the UK and the politics there. As soon as this happened, and as soon as we knew this happened, Keir Starmer basically said we have to research to see if this is illegal or not. They want what the Maduro is a bad guy thing, but we still don't know what the legality is of this kidnapping. And I sent Kartik a message right away, and I said, "Hey, listen, um, watch the backbenchers now." Right? That was the first thing I said to you. I said, watch the backbenchers. You are already starting to see, and I sent you a video earlier today. We're already starting to see the backbenchers become a little bit noisy in a caucus that is probably shaky at best right now. And then you have the Lib Dems, where, they had their good years of, Patty Ashdown, Charles Kennedy, and stuff like that. And then they didn't really go into the wilderness, but they kind of lost their way with Nick Clegg, I'd say. But now with Davey coming in here, he came right away and say, hey, listen, this is illegal. This is wrong. Starmer has to stand up to this. Why isn't he doing it? And still, from what I have seen, the labor government is basically sticking with the Maduro was a bad man narrative, and I do wonder if this can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I think right now for Starmer, he's safe because it does seem like the front benchers are going along with it. But I think as soon as you start seeing the Robin Cooks or people like that start breaking away, that's when everything starts imploding. What's your thought on what's happening in the
Yeah,
UK?
Robert Cook's a great analogy in terms of what happened in the Iraq War with Tony Blair and that government. So the Lib Dems were the bedrock of the opposition to the Iraq War policy under Patty Ashdown and under Charles Kennedy, who, by the way, Charles Kennedy chose not to serve in the coalition government when Nick Clegg made his deal
Mm-hmm.
with David Cameron. Charles Kennedy said, "Hey, I'm out as the immediate past leader. Hey, I don't want any part of
Yeah.
this." So he knew, and unfortunately, he was taken from us too soon. He died days after the 2015 general election. But
Yeah.
he knew what it was going to do to the Lib Dems brand. Ed Davey has restored the Lib Dems brand. They are now acting as if they are the conscience of the nation, which is very dangerous for labor. And this Starmer government, which does not have the backing, not only in terms of public opinion currently in the UK, but it does not have, as you mentioned, really the backing of his caucus anymore. It's shaky at
Mm-hmm.
best. And I think since Angela Rayner was, I think, and I do think Starmer tried to stand by her. I don't blame him for this. But since
Mm-hmm.
the Daily Telegraph, which turns a blind eye to such abuses from Tories, but if it's a working class woman who works her way up from Northern England, from Manchester, oh heaven forbid, we have to make sure she never gets to power. So they made it so that she had to resign. And basically, I think the government, or at least Starmer, has been on poor footing with the left since that happened.
Right.
Now to take the side of the Americans, or not, well, maybe not to take the side of the Americans, but to kind of take the side of the Americans. There's no
Right.
the people, I think, who vote Labor, a big chunk of them do not want any ambiguity on this issue of the United States, and particularly on Donald Trump. So This is an issue, and I think it's going to be an issue for Stammer, looking like a toady of the U.S. Now, what happens if Labor brings in someone else? Is that person, once they have the responsibility of governing, Dave, or they are going to fall back into the same pattern of saying, "Oh, well, we need the Americans more than they need us. We've got to pull our punches." Or do you think because Stammer is leaving such a bad taste in people's mouths? I'm convinced this Labor government. There will be another prime minister. Whenever the next general election is, hopefully it's not until 2029, but maybe it's before that because of
Right.
public opinion. I am convinced there will be another leader of the Labor Party. The question is, will that leader of the Labor Party be as much of a toady to the United States as Stammer is proving to be? Or will they realize, because of the backbenches, they're going to need to be a heck of a lot tougher on Trump and the U.S.?
Well, I mean, and then there's the other possibility, I think, and we can't, you know, take away from this. There are two things that one thing could happen, one thing is going to happen. The thing that is going to happen is Scotland's going to have an election. Okay, and if the SNP all of a sudden do well in that election, and this might trigger that. This might trigger people who are voting for Labor to now move away from Labor. Right now, whether they vote for I keep on wanting to say UKIP, but whenever they go to if they go to Reform, or because they're not going to Tories. And you mentioned this in a conversation that we had. You said, who the Tories who were going to go to Reform, they've already gone. They were like in the first patch to go. Right now, what's going to be taken from Reform are going to be those, pro Brexit Labor voters. Right.
Those
So
are the voters, by the way, that Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not a huge fan of Corbyn, but I will give Corbyn this. He was so worried about offending them, which is why he was so
right.
ambiguous on Brexit.
Well, and this brings me to the second point, actually, a perfect segue, which is that it's so fragmented as far as political parties in the UK right now. Do those who oppose Stammer, do they just not necessarily go with Corbyn, obviously, but do they break away and start something else? Do they break away and start like old Labor? I don't know. Do they right? Do they go to the Greens? Because there is that possibility as well. Because now that you got Reform breaking off from both parties, we'll see what happens in the next general election as far as the SNP and Plaid Cymru and stuff. I don't know what will happen there, but you are starting to see it kind of back in the days of the old Southern Democratic primaries that you have so many candidates running. In this case it would be political parties running, that someone could just win by 22%, 23% and take the constituency, right? So do they create that other break? And could Venezuela, because it is seeming like to me more and more that Venezuela is becoming the catalyst for the disintegration possibly of Labor, but I do want to see where the Lib Dems go. Is this where the Lib Dems finally have their moment to shine? Because I do think they're playing it correctly. I mean, they've played it correctly in the past, but never necessarily electorally benefited from it.
Yeah, maybe in the 2005. I mean, you mentioned Charles Kennedy. Maybe that 2005 general election when he was the leader, they did benefit from it. They took, I think, a lot of Labor voters who were unhappy with the Iraq War, but that was really their high watermark in terms of vote share. Now, of course, in terms of seats, it's right now, but that was because of
Right.
the clunkiness of the last election in 2024. But their best historic performance, actually, as a party, was that 2005 election in terms of vote share. It's funny. Also, I think Labor. This is maybe ancient history to a lot of people, but there were a core of Labor voters throughout the UK who were really excited when Ken Livingstone uh, welcomed Hugo Chavez to London, and that that constituency is still there. And I cannot imagine what those people are thinking about Stammer at this moment.
Oh no, yeah, if they're for Chavez, yeah, obviously, when you arrest the successor, that's probably going to have an impact. And I mean, because it comes to the point, I think the UK was very similar, compared to the United States as a two party country. Okay, If you wouldn't vote for Lib Dems. Now, Northern Ireland's totally different. I would even go as far as saying Wales is totally different as well. But at least in England, somewhat Scotland, you always had the question of, do I really, you had strategic voting. Okay, do I want to vote for this person to make sure that this person doesn't get in? I mean, we do that all the time in the US. That's basically how our campaigns run. We don't vote for anyone, we vote against somebody. Does this become more fragmented now? That if you're like in West London, okay, if you are in the places south and west of London in general, okay, do you start seeing the Lib Dems, because Lib Dems are doing well in those areas? Do you start seeing people say, well, reform has fragmented the Tories, Labor isn't as strong, I'll go ahead and vote Lib Dem now because I feel that now there is a possibility that I could vote for a Lib Dem and that would actually be my MP. I'm sure a lot of them before were like, no, I'm going to vote one or the other to just avoid having the other one in. And also, I guess, reform is going to kind of change that dynamic as well, just because of what they stand for.
There are already, as you know, um, constituencies in the South where Labor, their Labor vote has basically collapsed through the years,
Right.
and the Lib Dems are the chief rival to the Tories there. So I think that trend continues. Now, what do voters in the industrial heartland, in the old Red Wall, do? What do voters in the Midlands do? That's a great question, because I think there's an exodus to reform in those places from labor. And if labor is trying to win back those voters and aren't appealing to kind of core liberal values people as a result, because it seems like Stammer already is trying to be Farage light in many ways, then
Right.
I think there's an exodus to the Lib Dems, and Ed Davey is a very charismatic leader. The Lib Dems have not always had people that I think people that voters on the left would have appreciated. Nick Clegg rubbed people the wrong way. Vince Cable rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Joe Swinson just didn't have uh, that
Right.
magnetic personality. I think really since Patty Ashdown, I like Charles Kennedy, but I don't think he had it either. There's something this guy has. Ed Davey has something, and
Yeah.
and he's got the personality. We saw the sort of kind of work days routine that we're used to from Florida, the Bob Graham work days.
Right.
Those sort of kind of offbeat things he did during the campaign, uh, which people laughed at. To me, they said, "Oh well, the Lib Dems, they're not a serious party. Look at the stuff Ed Davey's doing." But it put them in the shop window,
Right.
so to speak. So I think it's very possible. Now, the big question is, does that lead to some degree of tactical voting and tactical shifts where Lib Dems and Labor come together and say, okay, um, there are certain parts of the country where you're going to do better than we are, or vice versa. And maybe the Greens become part of this. Maybe you need a grand coalition like you typically have in Germany to keep Farage and reform out.
Well, and back to the topic, because what I'm trying to figure out is, does this Venezuela issue have staying power? Does it cause a defection? Because after Iraq, yes, Gordon Brown lost, right? But I wouldn't say after Iraq. I mean, as soon as that election came up, Gordon Brown lost. But it didn't devastate. I mean, it hurt labor in a sense of they lost and they lost seats, but it didn't devastate them. It didn't have any type of impact like we saw with the progressive conservatives in 1993 in Canada, right? This total breakdown. Okay. The question I have is, if we have an issue with Greenland and we have this issue with Venezuela, does this lead to, and so we're not even talking about stuff internally, domestically in the UK. We're not talking about anything regarding Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. We're mostly talking about the English voters. Do Can Labour possibly have with foreign affairs a progressive conservative type collapse? I mean, now that was a huge collapse, but a collapse nonetheless. I don't know. What do you think about that? I don't know if that could happen, but I can see a world where it doesn't happen, like what happened with Gordon Brown and being able to keep the Labor Party together. Um, but then I can also see where it could happen.
It happened with the Tories in the last election, not quite to the PC level of the Tim
True.
Campbell election, but but it did happen. The vote collapse was pretty remarkable. How low they were. If Labor goes down into that level, let's say below that 24% that the Tories ended up with, 18 to 20%, where they are in the opinion polls right now.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the the thing that Labor probably is going to have to do, maybe to save themselves and save this whole thing, is to agree to the Lib Dems' long-term demands about proportional representation and getting rid of first past the post. And that might benefit Labor at this point, because I could see them in this first past the post system, them collapsing to 60 or 70 seats at this
True.
rate. So
True.
maybe that's the thing they do to
And
create a coalition in the next.
yeah, I mean, well, that makes sense to me because I don't think this is going to go away. I mean, it might, but Venezuela, the issue of Venezuela might go away, but it's not going to be replaced by anything better. Right? Whatever the next issue is going to be, I think it's going to be substantially worse, which, may be a good comparison, which is a good segue to the next country I want to talk about, is like the Socialist Party in France and the collapse that they had there, and a tiny bit of revival happening there. But I want to talk about Macron is had a response very much like the like the Labor government has had in Britain. And I'm going to go ahead and put this on the screen right now. Is reading Le Monde today, and the headline they have in their English version of the paper says Macron's silence on Venezuela risks sounding like admission of powerlessness. So basically, he's just coming across as being very weak, like Stammer is as well. But what I do find interesting, and you pointed this out to me, and I looked at Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So you have Marine Le Pen, who says, hey, Maduro's a bad guy, but this is not the way you go about doing it. Then you have Mélenchon, of course, saying all of it's bad, right? But you are seeing a convergence of the far left and the far right, saying you have to respect the sovereignty of these nations. Whereas I haven't seen what the Republicans have said, but you do have the Macronist, okay, En Marche, Ensemble, or whatever the movement is called today. You do have them, on the other hand, just not responding, like not saying anything. And to me, you're seeing strange bedfellows with Mélenchon and Le Pen. But I mean, obviously, they're not going to be any coalition. They're not dumb. Like, I hate to say this, unlike Democrats in the United States who think Marjorie Taylor Greene is all of a sudden your friend. Okay, she's not. Okay, so they're aware of that. But it does, to me, I think Mélenchon's maybe not in a good position. But could this Venezuela situation and the Rassemblement National's response to it, could this have just clinched, even though she can't run? Okay, Jordan Bardella would run. Does this clinch them the election? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not totally convinced, but I do think it moves that further in that direction, right? And let's keep in mind the runoff in the last election was in 2022 was significantly closer than 2017. So we've already seen electoral performance out of Le Pen. Now it'll be Bardella this time, but
Right.
unless there's an overturning of the prohibition from the courts, which we don't anticipate. I think Macron has become increasingly, not just increasingly unpopular, but I think Macron is also now in a position where he's seen as devious and duplicitous, which I've been saying for years.
Yep.
And I think now the French voters see it, the French electorate sees it. And I don't think there's, I know Americans who are very, who like to justify the cowboy diplomacy and all of this imperialist behavior going back to Reagan, and particularly George W. Bush will say, well, the British and the French, they had their empires, so who are they to question us? But we're in a period of time, in an era where I think the populations of both of European countries on the left and the right are concerned about issues around sovereignty, national
Yeah.
sovereignty. I see this in Canada with the right in Canada. This is why I think there is a split between, even on the whole issue of the U.S., there's a split between the very natural pro-American traditional conservatives, like guys like Darrell Bricker and Andrew Coyne, who is also a conservative, but is and Rudyard Griffiths, another one, also a conservative. Those two guys are very concerned about national sovereignty, and I'm seeing this even in Germany. Well, maybe you want to talk about Germany later, but uh, this is the case in France with Le Pen. If you read the statement she made on, I'm confused because it was the New Year's time. Was the invasion on a Friday, a Saturday, whatever day it was? Uh,
I mean, yeah, I forget what it was, but she responded right
right
away
away,
on
yeah, whatever
Twitter.
day it was,
And
it
yeah,
was a
and
brilliant thing.
Bardella basically backed her up. Bardella did Maduro's a bad guy, but
It's about sovereignty.
you
It's
don't
about
do it this
national
way.
sovereignty and international law, international norms. Especially when Le Pen has made even more than her dad did, made an issue out of the European Union. The European Union argument is about sovereignty, right? That's the
Right.
argument she makes. And we're going to talk about Germany, but I'm seeing similar things on the right in Germany. I do not think there is an appetite for American imperialism on the left or the right in Europe currently. Now, the institutional middle, this is the problem. This going back to what we talked about in England, or in the UK, I should say, in Britain.
Mhm.
There is an institutional establishment of grown-ups, the same people who lost control of the United States, the same people who were Republicans but are now backing Democrats in the United States. That institutional middle thinks they can hold, they can keep norms going by appeasing what is becoming increasingly, and I hate to say it, we're both Americans, and I love this country dearly, but what is becoming increasingly a rogue country. You know, it's tough to differentiate the actions of the United States from the actions of Russia. It's tough to differentiate the actions of the United States from the actions of China at this very moment. Now, not when Biden was president. I'm talking about right now. Um,
Yeah.
and so that institutional middle, center left and center right, that controls everything in Brussels, by the way, controls the EU,
Hmm.
is in governance now that the Labour is back in the UK. Certainly, Macron is maybe the leader of that in Europe. Merz certainly seems he's part of that. That institutional middle is losing credibility the longer they go without confronting the United States. That's the bottom line.
And yeah, I mean that then I guess so we'll go ahead and go to Germany because this kind of is a continuation of exactly that. Merz has also said the same thing. He's just kind of been quiet, maybe a little bit more in the this isn't the way to do it
Yeah,
type
it's
of
a little
thing.
stronger than what
Whereas,
Macron and Stammer said. Yeah.
right. Well, see, here's the thing with like Macron, he's just like really said nothing. He's just Maduro's a bad guy, right? Um, and with Stammer, and okay, let me mention this because I didn't mention this. Nigel Farage even said tepidly, maybe this isn't the best way to do
Right.
it. Right. So, and he did the Maduro's bad guy and all that too. But when it comes to Stammer, it's more the, you know, question. The mistake I think he made and what hurts him electorally in the UK is when he said we have to figure out if this is illegal or not. Or we're researching if this is illegal. It almost would have been better if he had just said nothing
Yeah.
than to act like, oh, we need to see if this is illegal. And I think like a ninth grade civics student would know you just don't do that. Right. And what I don't understand the angle for Stammer because like here in the United States you have an angle. And maybe we'll just mention this. You have the angle of Venezuelan voters and Hispanic voters,
Yeah.
which now Ron DeSantis has said, what was it that
Yeah.
he's going to try? You know the story,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It
You
just
just
popped up.
mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, DeSantis is saying that he wants to indict him here in Florida, indict Maduro because he released the prisoners out of his jails and they all came to Florida. So now you're calling the Venezuelan voters who had just on Saturday shifted back to being favorable towards the Republican Party. You've done so many things on voting trend about that electorate. Now he's calling them criminals.
I mean, this probably makes Byron Donalds a nominee now in Florida. I mean, I don't see any DeSantis wing being able to do that with a bad showing in Miami-Dade. But anyway, that's Florida. But I did want to mention that because my point is that there is some sort of consequent or benefit if you look at American politics, but there really isn't, because Venezuela is not within the sphere of influence of Europe at all. So that doesn't make
Although
sense.
we
But
do know historically there was a dispute between Britain and the United States over that area in the 1890s.
right.
And the current dispute between Venezuela and Guyana is kind of a knock on from that.
Well, yeah, I guess we can say yes, that there are, things going on there. There are places, there are the small islands. You got the Barbadoses, the Curacao. You got all these other places that the Netherlands are there, the
Yeah,
French
yeah.
are there, the British are there. So they are in the region. Which brings me to another
Yeah,
one.
and I should mention this is off topic, but Curacao qualified for the World Cup, so we have multiple Dutch-speaking countries at this coming World
Yeah,
Cup because Curacao they speak Dutch. That's right off the coast of
I
Venezuela.
I think Slovakia is still in the
Yeah,
playoff.
they
I'm
are in
not
the
sure.
playoff. They are in the playoff.
Okay,
But
okay. So that's what I'm.
Curacao qualified directly. They're
Oh,
in.
they did.
They're
Oh,
in.
nice. Oh, cool. Awesome. But so I don't think there's much to talk about with Germany, because I tried to look for the alternative for Germany response. They've been very quiet about this, and even the Social
The
Democrats have been
indication I'm
very
getting is that the AfD is not is they're not taking Trump's side basically. That there is
okay.
a they are using the national. They are not making the big pronouncements Le Pen made or Ed Davey have made, but they are taking. My understanding is that they are taking this national sovereignty approach. That
Right.
and so they probably will, in fact, not oppose the government on Greenland. And it sounds like they are not happy with Mertz kind of mealy mouthing the thing about. Although he was a little stronger, as you said, but mealy mouthing the thing
Well,
about
a
Venezuela,
little
just
like
slightly. Yeah, it's relative. It's all relative.
he unlike Macron, he said something, and then unlike again what Stammer did with the we have to determine if it's again that it would have just been better if he had said nothing instead of saying that, I think. Which then brings us back to this side of the pond in Canada, right? So if there's any, because we're talking about all these conservative movements really focusing on sovereignty and saying, you know, either going out and saying, "Hey, he shouldn't have done this," or being kind of quiet but pushing it that way. Not Pierre Poilievre, not the Conservative Party of Canada. I think we can now say unequivocally that we now see the Conservative Party and MAGA Republicanism joined at the hip.
Yeah,
Right. I think there's always been up till now kind of a maybe the conservatives are a little bit different, even though you and I look at them as no, they weren't. But there's just something that was kind of a little different. Now, Pierre Poilievre has just been like, yeah, I'm 100% on board with what he did. Now, Carney, from what I see, hasn't really said anything. And from a strategic point, I guess I can get that. Okay. Um, but I don't know. Maybe you know what the NDP has done. I mean, they're still going through
yeah, they don't have any.
all of what they need to do. But but yeah, what's your thought on
Although, I mean,
Canada?
the NDP seems like they're increasingly not relevant outside of British Columbia, where they are surging once again in the polls.
Right.
And I think the current NDP government in BC might hang on. Now, if they do, then I think they even if they're not relevant at the federal level, they're relevant as a party again. And we know, obviously, Manitoba also they're fairly strong. But Don Davies hasn't said anything of note that I've seen. He's the sort of leader.
Okay.
I don't know what to classify
Right.
him as. I mean, he's the last man
He's at
standing.
least the thought
Yeah,
leader within the NDP. Whoever the leader is, I still think that Don Davies is kind of the NDP thought leader
yeah,
of who's there now,
yeah.
right?
Right. I mean, I'm
Who
looking for his
survived
comment,
the
not
election.
whoever the actual leader is. Tom Mulcair has been very outspoken on Canadian television. Now, I think of him as the other thought leader in the NDP still.
And Jagmeet Singh is just like checked out of
Yeah.
everything.
Although,
You notice that he's just like, I don't know if he said anything, but he's kind of like, I'm doing my own thing now. See you
yeah,
later.
Jagmeet Singh.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to dwell on this. I want to get back to Venezuela in a minute, but I do think as time moves on, we're going to see him as a somewhat heroic figure because he prevented. I mean,
I
he
agree.
did enough to prevent Polyev from becoming prime minister. I mean, he knew he would have to fall on the sword, but he didn't want that for the country. And thank
Yeah.
goodness now looking at Polyev. Polyev's comments were irresponsible and show this merging, as you say, of the two movements. The MAGA adjacent folks in Alberta and in Manitoba and in eastern British Columbia now are effectively the Conservative Party. Are effectively the CPC.
Right.
In fact, we're hearing for this conference in Calgary, there are low numbers of registrants coming from Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. So Polyev will pass his leadership review, even though the party is becoming, even though the recent polling shows them making up some ground in Ontario. But we'll see if there's a federal election this year. I have my doubts about that. And this is the bottom line. Okay, as much as Carney has moved to the middle, has tacked away from Trudeauism, as much as people who supported other candidates for leader, whether it was Chrystia Freeland or whoever, um, who now, by the way, did you notice she got appointed to something by Zelensky yesterday in the Ukrainian government? So that's a
Oh,
yeah,
wow. No,
good
no, I
good
didn't see
good
that one.
choice.
Yeah.
You know, I think that like their international roving. I have to get more details on it, but um, of course she's Ukrainian. For those who don't
Right.
know,
Exactly.
um,
Right.
but I think this is the thing. The more Polyev runs into Trump, runs into MAGA, and tries to placate MAGA and the Kevin O'Learys and those people, he runs the risk of Carney and the Liberals winning an electoral mandate, winning a majority this time by default because of the anti-Americanism that's running rampant in Canada. And I will tell you from being up there recently, you were up there even more recently than me. Now
Yeah.
we've both been there in the last few months. It is running like wildfire, anti-Americanism. And Polyev is so concerned about keeping his own party leadership, and I have to say, keeping his MPs in line. Right? He has a bullwhip to them, which is completely different than the leadership style of Aaron O'Toole. He's using Andrew Scheer, who I thought better of, as kind of his right hand. Like he's not really straight man. Like he's just kind of. I'll describe it.
He's kind of like a Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick type of approach.
Yeah,
Whereas, Justin Trudeau would have that big stick and like, you're gone, you're gone, you're
yeah,
gone, right? Like
but
he would speak softly and well, I mean, he would speak
but I'm
loudly
trying to
and carry a big stick and
exactly.
all
I'm
right.
trying to figure out the role of Andrew Scheer here because he seems to be now Polyev's enforcer in a way that
Right, which seems weird to
weird.
me. I mean, especially considering this guy used to be a speaker, and the speaker is known to be impartial.
Yes,
Though he was one of the most non-impartial speakers that the House of
that's true.
Commons had ever seen. So when he ran for leadership, I wasn't surprised. The one worry that I have, and this goes back to the theme of this whole podcast that we're doing in our first day here, our first one, is the influence of American money, possibly, in upcoming Canadian elections. Influence of money on an Alberta referendum, um, separation referendum, or the Conservative Party, or whatever, right? I'm worried that there's going to be, because you do have these intermediaries like Kevin O'Leary, right? Who I have a feeling there can fraudulently be money brought into the Canadian Conservative Party that will somehow not be traceable and will somehow not be able to be stopped by the Canadian government. I don't know. That might be paranoia on my
No, I
part, but
don't
I
think it's
do.
paranoia because American Republicans are experts at dark money. And if they want to gain control of Canada, now here's the other thing. I meant to mention this about Carney. Carney seems to be getting along well with Danielle Smith, very strangely.
Right.
Which maybe that's part of Polyev's paranoia now that he sees that triangulation. Danielle Smith doesn't have really fixed beliefs. She's on the right, but we remember from the Wild Rose days, she'll go all over the place to try and just benefit herself. So she's getting along with Carney in a way she didn't get along with Trudeau. And so does this mean we're going to see Polyev really tie himself to MAGA and suddenly lots of MAGA money and dark American money come into Canadian politics? It's much more possible in Canada than it is in Britain, France, or Germany. Not just because of the geographic proximity, but because of the laws in Canada. Canada doesn't have the
Well,
tightness in their election system that those other countries do.
correct. And the other thing I think it goes back to what you were talking about originally is that being extremely pro American right now does not seem like a smart electoral move. So
No,
why would you? Right. And it makes me think, is there a financial aspect of this that makes it that it's financially beneficial for Pierre Polyev, for conservative MPs, for Daniel Smith, for, I
and
mean,
I think it's
obviously,
really, yeah, I think you're right because there are a lot of intellectual conservatives in Canada who have loved Polyev, have said, oh, he's our best parliamentarian,
right,
all of this stuff for 20 years. And well, not
right.
quite for 20 years. He got elected 20 years ago, but for maybe the last 10 years, since Stephen Harper lost, that are now saying, what is he doing? Why is he so? Some of his biggest backers, including people very close to Stephen Harper. I don't want to get too deep into the intricacies of Canadian politics. Maybe I follow it day to day more than 99% of the people in the US.
Right.
But there are people close to Harper who are in the Harper government who probably would not say things publicly unless they were passing it off of Stephen Harper, who have now become
Mm-hmm.
very critical of Polyev's leadership style in the House of Commons of the Conservative Party and this kind of game of footsie with Donald Trump. Now,
Right.
I always thought Harper was pretty far to the right, but Harper is that. I mean, he was the one guy who could keep the PCs and the Canadian Alliance people together. It seems like Polyev is not able to do that, and I just feel like the PCs are peeling off.
Right. And I'm looking right now, just now, I was looking at the Canadian government under Harper, and I would have look at people who I would consider now to be quite moderate. Rona Ambrose, Tony Clement. I think he's involved in Ontario government now. Jason Kenney, actually. I mean, there are a lot
I
of
think Jason
people. As a
Kenney
matter of
is critical of the Conservative Party in general in
right,
Alberta and national federally at this point.
right. And James Moore, I think, has been on TV a lot, kind of being that way as well. And I'm looking at these
James
people.
Moore is one of the people I'm speaking of. Okay, I didn't mention names, but he's one of the people you can very clearly see where he's going on Polyev, and I'm thinking
Right.
he would not come on television and say this without at least saying, "Hey, PM Harper, am I on solid ground?"
Yeah. Right. John Baird, here's another name too. And
Yeah,
it's like, now some of these people have just checked out, but like, I've always told you I don't like Pierre Polyev. And it was from
you were
back in
right. You
those
were
days
so right.
because he was like, whereas John Baird and others would get up and be quite civil. It would be usually Pierre Polyev and usually Peter MacKay, which is weird because he came from the PC side, not the reform side. That would kind of be the attack dogs for the Conservative Party once the merger happened. So yeah, I've always been skeptical of him, and he's just kind of been in the same position that I thought. Now, before we go, I'm going to make a prediction. And you and I talked about this, and you said that you already talked about this, and maybe we'll kind of make some sort of predictions at the end of something, right? If you don't have one, that's okay. I've just decided to do this right now. But you and I were talking about Argentina. And I just have this feeling that Trump is going to give Argentina the green light to take the Falkland Islands. I'm surprised they have not gone that route yet. Um, I mean, because they really can, because that would not be direct American involvement.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and remember, the United States was not involved with that Falklands dispute.
No, in fact, the
Okay.
United States was very, very.
They were.
Yeah, they were very. People may not realize this, particularly because there's American propaganda that Reagan and Thatcher were like this, and Thatcher did what Reagan wanted her to do. It's not true at all. In fact, I think Thatcher really stood up to Reagan during Falklands. The inclination of not only Reagan but people like Jeane Kirkpatrick, who were in that administration, was to side with the Argentine junta because they were reliable, right-wing, anti-communist government in Latin America.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and he and George Bush were negotiating with Galtieri right until the end, like right until as troops were landing in Port Stanley.
Yeah, and I was about to say that they felt there was a fait accompli when the troops landed in Port Stanley. A lot of Americans in the government that, okay, Britain can't defend the islands. It's done.
Yeah, yeah. And then they brought down HMS Invincible and stuff like that. And then you had the sinking of the General Belgrano and all that. Yeah, it's a war I've studied a lot. I actually find it quite interesting because I grew up during that time.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah, I remember.
So so I'm thinking now with the United States just giving money to Argentina to deal with their crises they have there without not worrying about keeping the money here in the United
true
States.
Conservatism, right?
Right, exactly. I'm just like all of a sudden it's like he's gonna tell them the Argentines are gonna come to Trump, say, we want the Falklands. Okay, they're owned by the British. You don't like them. They're evil NATO people. And he's gonna say, go ahead, I won't do anything. Okay. Now the question is, if Argentina takes over the Falklands, does then the United States government recognize the Islas Malvinas, as they would be known by that time, as part of Argentine sovereign territory, and then would say any attack against Argentine's sovereign territory, which is an attack on this hemisphere, is therefore an attack on the United States, and therefore
the Dunroe Doctrine, right? The Dunroe Doctrine, the silly stuff.
Exactly.
I mean,
it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I think it's very plausible, actually, and I think that there's going to be an effort by the United States if there's found to be more resources in French Guiana to try and expel the French from there.
Right.
That's another thing I definitely see. And now this dispute between Guyana and Venezuela, which is an old colonial dispute, which we've talked about the British role in that, and the British have backed Guyana pretty strongly diplomatically to this point. Where does the U.S. go on that? I think it may sound like a crazy prediction you made. I don't think it's so crazy.
Right. I mean, it should be a crazy prediction. See, that's the problem. It should be a crazy prediction, but it's not. Is there anything you would like to end on? Because we're almost coming to the end of our time, where we are at the end of our time now. Is there anything you would like to
Greenland specifically.
Oh, yeah, let's get into Greenland.
I've got a prediction on Greenland. I think the U.S. I think Trump is not a guy who plays the long game. He has some insatiable need to take Greenland. I think this is going to become a standoff. Now, you don't send troops into Greenland in January or February, obviously, but this is going to be a standoff through the summer. Will Europe remain strong? I have my doubts. And it may be then where Canada has to step up, because as I've written about over at the 11th province, a Substack that you and I do together on Canada, I think that this is a great threat to Canada. I think they could be choked to death by the U.S. taking Greenland and messing with Canadian sovereignty over the Northwest Passage, which the U.S. already disputes, and creating situations where Canada's economy becomes more and more subservient to the United States. Just as Prime Minister Carney, for all the criticism I had of Carney earlier, he is doing he's doing what he needs to do to try and patch up the relationship with China, patch up the relationship with India, and strengthen the already strong bonds with Europe because of the American threat. So he's doing
Right.
that. He didn't resort. He didn't fall. He's the one leader who didn't. I have to say, Carney is the one leader that did not fall to American blackmail about tariffs. Uh, Von Leyden gave in for the EU, which really
Right.
angered both Merz and Macron, rightly.
Yeah. Right.
Stammer gave in. Japan gave in. Korea gave in. Vietnam gave in. So Indonesia gave in. Apparently, the price for Indonesia was to buy Boeing planes, which is the way America. This didn't start with Trump, by the way. This is the way
No,
Americans
no,
do
no,
things.
no, no. Right.
But Canada has not made a deal. Now, there are people who say in Canada, out north of the border, that Carney was ready to make a deal, and then Doug Ford called him over to his cottage in Ontario, his summer cottage, and basically talked him out of it. And if that's the case, okay, maybe Carney was weak and then he just listened to the last man. But the point remains, Canada did not give in to that blackmail. In July
Right.
and August, when Trump was setting arbitrary deadlines. Oh, if you don't do this by August 1st or August 13th, or he make up these random dates. Canada is going to have to be the strong will of the Western world against American aggression in Greenland. Because my prediction is Europe, they won't back down publicly, but they'll just let it happen.
Well, I don't know if you saw James O'Brien today.
I haven't
He
watched them
had a
yet today.
video.
Yeah, on LBC.
Okay, that's basically what he said. He said in his video, he said, here's the thing, if they go and just take it over Greenland, nothing's stopping them. Right. Now, do I think marching into the streets of Toronto would be a little bit more difficult? Yeah. But going into the streets of Nuuk, okay, not that hard. But that's what he said. I mean, and then this goes ahead.
And by the way, they won't. This is another thing. All these people say, "Oh, well, we could take Canada." I hear that all the time from more bombastic right-wing Americans. They won't get to Toronto. They won't get to Montreal. They won't get to Ottawa. They'll be defeated before they get there.
Well, and I think too, it comes to the point that if, and I don't know what the process would be. Maybe this is something to look at next time. Is if Greenland is taken by the U.S., which is essentially a NATO country taking territory away from another NATO country. Does there become a point where you see a breakup of NATO? Like, or the United States, I don't know what the process is of the removal of a country, or do they just create a new security force in Europe? And if they do, then you have some countries that have to decide where they're going to be. The two countries that have to be worried the most is my new home country of Slovakia, and Czechoslovakia, right? Of Slovakia and Hungary, who have been very much pro-Putin and kind of somewhat Eurosceptic. I mean, Orban very much Eurosceptic, but I don't think Fico is Eurosceptic, but not as much as
Fico is, I think, a little more pro-American and pro-Russian than the Western European.
Well, see, but if all of a sudden, I was just going to say, if all of a sudden you have a new security alliance in which you're Slovakia and Hungary, and you're bordered, because I assume that Romania and Bulgaria is going to stay with whatever that alliance is going to be. I also think possibly, does Ukraine get brought into that alliance? I don't know.
Yeah, if you don't have an American veto, they can come in.
Right, and so at this point, if you are Hungary,
let's face it, Ukraine is not a member of NATO right now because of the U.S.
Right.
And Georgia could come into that alliance too.
Right, exactly. Yes, exactly. So then all of a sudden, I mean, I guess the question is then, do you want...
And Canada will be part of that alliance.
Right, do you want to put yourself into a war? I mean, what I would do if I were the other countries, which they don't seem to be aggressive, okay? And this is, I think, a problem with Europe in general, is that if Greenland is somewhat... If all of a sudden there are U.S. troops in Greenland, okay, and then they figure out some peace deal. If you're the European forces, NATO forces, you stick 150,000 troops, combined forces, on the border with the United States. And then you yank the United States out of NATO. because they're, you know what, they're having the largest border in the world. Doesn't have the security I think that one thinks. Okay, because there are tons of holes in those, and also bringing the troops over there, I don't think is going to be an issue before any possible thing. I don't believe we're talking about an invasion of Canada, but um, and you know,
Yeah, this is why I don't think the U.S. actually has the ability to get to Canadian cities. They've invaded Canada before.
true,
I mean, I've written about it, not recently, but not in the last 100 years. They haven't invaded Canada 150
right?
years. But
But they didn't have stealth
here's the bottom
fighters
line.
back then. I mean,
Right, but here's the bottom line: the U.S. has shown no ability. This is why Venezuela. We don't want to get into the actual logistics of what's going on in Venezuela. This is why
right?
the U.S. can intimidate to say we run Venezuela. I run Venezuela. Trump can say the U.S. has no ability, and we have seen this since Vietnam. They have no ability to hold territory
Right.
outside of the United States. They have no ability, even if they invade and liberate a place and they win all these tactical battles, to actually sit in occupation of a country for any length of time
No,
without having major problems. Which is why I'm saying they won't even get to Toronto if they invade. Okay, they might have some small victories, or they won't get to Montreal. They'll be defeated somewhere on the South Shore before they cross the river.
I mean,
And
yeah, no, I agree, and like for me, it's just kind of like I think the biggest hole right now, and we're not talking domestically, we're talking internationally now with the United Nations. There, I've always I mean, even though I support the idea of the United Nations, I've kind of considered them a useless institution since the Iraq
yeah,
War. To be honest,
yeah.
uh, right now is when the United Nations should be stepping up and saying something. I mean, even with the Iraq War, right? Okay, even though it didn't affect how that was done, except you had a coalition of the willing that were just a bunch. I mean, it was America and a bunch of small countries that had nothing. I mean, except for the UK, I guess. But in the case that we have in the United Nations now, no one is really saying we need to have some sort of resolution um, condemning this and
I believe South Africa is the only country that's said something,
really
and they didn't get enough support on it.
really
Yeah.
I mean, because there
Um,
comes a point that because if they run if we run Venezuela, at what point does it become like the first the first Persian Gulf War, that Venezuela is essentially Kuwait? Now I guess in that case they annexed Kuwait and it became part of Iraq in their eyes,
yeah.
right? But I don't see how it differs. How can you condemn Iraq for going into Kuwait and taking it over and running it, and not do the same thing with the United States? I mean, we're in early days. I don't think that the American government realizes how many troops are going to need on the ground and everything like that to do that.
Right.
I mean, unless they get and here's the thing: unless they get another president in there that cooperates with Trump, they're
I,
just going to be just as
that would
square.
be the only way.
They're going to be just like Maduro, but on the flip side.
This is what I've been told, that even with Greenland, I think the U.S. can march in and take Greenland. I personally think that. But
Yeah.
I've been told by someone I respect who knows a lot about European military capabilities as well as American military capabilities, that the U.S. can do that. Like I've said, they win battle after battle in Iraq, in Vietnam,
Hmm.
in Afghanistan, but they can never consolidate control of these
Right.
countries. They have no skill as colonial government. I mean, as much as people would want to condemn the French and the British for their colonial projects, and they should be condemned for it, they had certain talent in their country. Britain had whole schools dedicated to training people to govern empire,
Right.
provinces or territories in the empire. I think France probably did too. The U.S. has no capability of this. So how is the U.S. going to govern Venezuela? How is the U.S. going to govern Greenland?
Right. And we don't know who's going to come on. Yeah, I mean, we'll just see how this plays out, because I think right now there are just so many hypotheticals that even in a week from now, some of those hypotheticals will be answered. Maybe not the do they take Greenland, but kind of the direction of where American foreign policy is going and how that's going to affect the other countries. Because my biggest worry
Right.
right now is you do see the UK, France, and Germany, but particularly the UK. Um, it does seem like Stammer is just fucking it up. Okay, like
Yeah.
really bad. Macron's just being the typical wimp that he always is. I mean, he's like the pure. I'm not going to do anything, or if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do both sides, like negotiate with Putin, right? And
Yeah.
Mers is new, so you can't really. We don't know what his foreign policy is like, really. So we're going to see how that shifts. And I do think for Mers, he's probably more okay. Maybe this is what I might say. He seems to be more about keeping Europe together than he is about what's happening in the United
Yes.
States. And he's like, hey, if we don't want to deal with this shit with them, we all have to get together. Because I was looking at what he was talking about today. He was talking about how the German economy is in trouble and stuff like that. So he has already pivoted back to domestic issues. So I think for him, maybe it's more about keeping Europe together, which would be a Merkel type of thing as well.
I'm going to finish on the point you just made, and I think this is actually my prediction. The UN is a useless body at this point. It's irrelevant. I know they do good things like UNESCO
Right.
and UNICEF, and that's great. They can keep doing that. But in terms of settling disputes, they have now rendered themselves useless. It started with Kosovo, right? It started with Russia's veto in '99 and their unwillingness to do anything about Serbian aggression and Russia backing
Which
Serbia.
is the benefit
So
of
NATO
having
had to take it
NATO
on
as
themselves.
well.
Yes, right,
Right.
right. In a time when the relationship between the United States and Europe was healthier. Now it's absolutely useless. The United States can hold over the head of the United Nations the fact that they're based in New York,
Yeah.
and can behave in an outrageous fashion. Now, granted, I know prior to 2017 or so we were never in this position, but there has now been there was not the effort after Trump lost to Biden for these international institutions. He just thought, okay, we caught a cold and it's gone.
Right.
To adjust to a reality where the American electorate and the American people had a thirst for empire and vengeance on the rest of the world. For some unknown reason, all these Americans want vengeance on everybody, on they're victims of everything.
Big dick
It's crazy.
syndrome. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And I even said this during the Bush administration. Because I've always seen this Republicans. It was like, if the Republicans said we're going to invade Norway next week, most of the Republicans would be for it because it's like, we got our guns and we can shoot something, right? It's like there's a infant mentality within that Republican Party, which as our education goes down, as we spend less on education, as we spend less on vaccines and making sure our children are healthy, I just think stupidity is going to fucking skyrocket in this country. But that's where we are. All right. So is there anything that you would like to add before we head on out?
No, that UN point was what I thought we should close on.
Yeah, so a lot in our first one, but I'm sure it's going to be still at 3 more years. Still at least 3 more years. I'm still Kartik and I think are kind of in the boat of could be longer if he lives. And elections, we'll see, right?
I don't think he's leaving office in 2029 if he's healthy.
I don't think so.
Doesn't matter what happens electorally.
And again, who can stop him? He has the army.
Yeah.
And by that time, he's going to have the army, a bunch of his supporters. I mean, that's already what they're doing with.
They would have purged the generals. They would have purged.
Which are already doing. And I mean, this is the reason why, and now with Project 2025, they can ask people about their political leanings, which means when all these new brown shirts come in for ICE, that's what it's going to be, a brown shirt. So they bring people in, give them their $50,000 bonus, I think $60,000 a year income. Say, do you support Donald Trump? Yes or no? Yes. Boom. Here's your gun. Here's your bulletproof jacket. Even though, you've already shown in the videos that you're not physically fit. So, that's where we're at. All right, everyone. Thank you all very much. We will see you in the next one. We'll try to do this once a week. And thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. And if you have any comments, put them down below about what you might want to hear us talk about or anything like that. But we're going to do this kind of format as far as like a podcast format for this. So, yeah. All right. Thank you all. Have a great day wherever it is you are. Bye-bye.